Julian Vance was a study in controlled force. I had 2 years of watching him to know. 2 years of sharing a pitch, a locker room, and the stale, recycled air of a team bus. And in all that time, my observations had coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. The world bent for him. Not in a loud, demanding way. He wasn't a shouter, not one of the guys who lived on bravado and backslaps. It was quieter than that. The ball just seemed to find his feet during a chaotic play. Referees gave him the courtesy of an explanation after a call. Even the autumn light, cutting through the high windows of the training facility, seemed to catch the gold in his short-cropped hair more often than anyone else's. My own existence on the team felt conditional by comparison. I was Leo, reliable on the wing, fast enough, but ultimately forgettable. I existed in the periphery, a functional cog in the machine that was built to let stars like Julian shine. I orbited him, a silent, unacknowledged satellite, cataloging the minutiae of his existence because it was more interesting than my own. The way he taped his wrists, a precise and methodical ritual. The low rumble of his voice when he was serious, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my own chest cavity. The almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth that passed for a smile. These were the data points of my quiet obsession. It was a lonely way to live, constructing a universe around someone who didn't know you were in it. My life was a series of disciplined routines: practice, class, gym, study, sleep. A monastic existence punctuated by the vicarious thrill of watching Julian move, watching him breathe. I told myself it was admiration, respect for a superior athlete. But in the hollow quiet of my dorm room at night, with the echo of the coach's whistle still in my ears, I knew it was something deeper, something heavier. A yearning so profound it felt like a physical ache, a permanent emptiness just below my ribs. The inciting incident, the tiny crack in the foundation of my carefully ordered world, was mundane. A Tuesday practice, damp and gray, the kind of day where the air feels heavy in your lungs. We were running drills, a frantic back and forth of passes and sprints. Julian went for a sliding tackle, a perfectly executed move of grace and aggression. He won the ball, clean as anything, but the other player, a clumsy freshman named Miller, came down awkwardly on his extended leg. There was no sound, no dramatic cry of pain. Julian just stayed down for a beat too long. The whole team froze. A Julian Vance on the turf was an anomaly, a disruption in the natural order of things. Coach blew the whistle, a sharp, panicked shriek. We all jogged over, forming a concerned circle. By the time we got there, he was already getting up, waving off the trainer who was sprinting onto the field. He had a hand on his left knee, his face a mask of grim annoyance. "I'm fine," he grunted, the words clipped. He tested his weight on it. A slight wince, the only betrayal of pain. Just twisted it. "Miller, watch your feet." He finished the practice, because of course he did. But he wasn't the same. The effortless glide was gone, replaced by a careful, almost calculated series of movements. He favored his right side, and a few times, I saw him subtly rubbing his knee after a hard run. I watched, of course. I watched every slight hesitation, every carefully placed footfall. Each one was a new entry in my mental ledger. That was the beginning. The injury wasn't severe enough for the bench, but it was persistent, a nagging ghost that attached itself to him, forcing a new routine. And my routine of observation shifted to accommodate it. My focus narrowed from his general presence to the specific, intimate theater of his knee. The locker room, once a space of loud, chaotic camaraderie I navigated with cautious invisibility, became a stage. After every practice, after every game, he would sit on the bench in front of his locker, stripped down to his compression shorts, and undertake the ritual of icing and wrapping his knee. The first few times, the team trainer helped him, his movements efficient and impersonal. But our trainer was stretched thin between 3 different sports teams, and soon Julian was left to his own devices. And he was terrible at it. For a man whose body was a finely tuned instrument of athletic precision, his hands were clumsy with the beige elastic bandage. He'd start the wrap too loose, and it would sag. He'd pull it too tight, and his jaw would clench as it cut off his circulation. I'd watch him from my own locker, pretending to be busy with my gear, my gaze flickering to his reflection in the bank of metal doors. I'd see the frustration mount in the set of his shoulders, the sharp, angry breaths he'd take before ripping the bandage off and starting again. I'd watch his hands, broad and capable, fingers calloused from years of work, become tangled and inept. I saw the faint, feathery hair on his thigh, darkened by sweat. I saw the powerful muscles of his quad tense and relax as he struggled. It was an agonizingly private spectacle, and I was its sole, secret audience. The other guys would be showering, shouting, laughing, completely oblivious to the small drama unfolding on bench number 12. This became our silent routine. His struggle, my surveillance. Days turned into a week, then 2. The knee wasn't getting worse, but it wasn't getting better either. It was just a new part of him, a vulnerability he was forced to confront daily. And I was the only one who seemed to be paying attention. My analysis of his micro-expressions became an obsession. The slight downward turn of his lips when the wrap slipped. The flash of irritation in his eyes when the metal clips wouldn't fasten. The resigned sigh that escaped him when he finally gave up and just threw the balled-up bandage into his locker. Sometimes I felt a flicker of his gaze in the mirror, and my heart would seize, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I'd immediately look down, my face hot, convinced I'd been caught staring. But when I dared to look up again, he'd be focused back on his knee, his brow furrowed in concentration. Was it my imagination? Or was he aware of my gaze? The not knowing was a sweet kind of torture. Small things started to happen. Things that were probably meaningless, but which I inflated with desperate significance. One afternoon, I was at the sinks, and he came to stand next to me. The space was wide enough for 3 people, but he chose the spot directly beside me, our shoulders almost touching. The heat from his body was a palpable force. He smelled of grass, sweat, and the clean, sharp scent of the soap provided by the school. He didn't say anything, just washed his hands, but his proximity felt like a declaration. I could feel the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. My own breathing became shallow, deliberate. I was acutely aware of every molecule of air between us. Another time, we were the last 2 on the field, doing extra sprints coach had assigned us as punishment for a sloppy drill. We ran in sync, our feet hitting the turf in a steady rhythm. When we finished, we collapsed onto the grass, side by side, chests heaving. For a full minute, we just lay there, staring up at the darkening sky, the only sound our ragged breaths mingling in the cool air. "Think we're done?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He turned his head on the grass to look at me. His eyes, a deep, startling blue in the twilight, held mine. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and rough. "We're done." He didn't look away. The moment stretched, thin and humming with unspoken energy. It was more than just 2 tired teammates. It felt charged. Then he pushed himself up, groaned as he put weight on his bad knee, and the spell was broken. He offered me a hand up, his grip firm and warm. The touch was brief, functional, but it sent a jolt straight through me that lingered long after he'd let go. These moments were my fuel. I'd replay them in my mind, dissecting them from every angle. The duration of his gaze, the temperature of his skin, the subtle shift in his tone. I was a detective searching for clues in a case only I knew existed, convincing myself that the scattered, circumstantial evidence pointed toward a conclusion I was too afraid to even name. Then came the away game against Northwood. A 2-hour bus ride, a grueling match in the pouring rain that ended in a tie, and the long, quiet ride back. The bus was dark, most of the guys asleep, their heads lolling against the windows. I was awake, as usual, watching the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers push away the rain. Julian was in the seat across the aisle from me, his long legs stretched out as much as the cramped space would allow. He wasn't asleep. I could see the faint glint of his eyes in the intermittent glow of passing headlights. He shifted, a quiet rustle of his team-issued tracksuit, and then a soft hiss of pain. He bent forward, his hands going to his knee. In the dim light, I saw his face tighten. "You okay?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. They sounded loud in the relative silence of the bus. He looked up, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Yeah, just cold makes it stiff." He started rubbing the joint, his thumb pressing into the muscle just above the kneecap. A low, frustrated sigh escaped his lips. "Feels like it's locked up." This was it. A crack in the armor. A moment of admitted weakness. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I am here. I am watching. I can help." The thoughts screamed in my head, but I said nothing. What could I say? What could I possibly offer? The chasm between us, between my secret world and his oblivious one, felt miles wide. Do you ever think about what happens after this? He asked, his voice a low murmur that barely carried across the aisle. The question was so unexpected it startled me. After the game? I asked, confused. No. After all of it. College. Soccer. He leaned his head back against the seat, his gaze fixed on the ceiling of the bus. If this, he gestured vaguely at his knee, is all it takes to slow you down, what's the point? It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. The invincible Julian Vance, questioning the entire foundation of his identity. He wasn't just annoyed by his injury. He was scared by what it represented. His mortality as an athlete. You're not slow, I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. You're the best player on the team. Everyone knows that. A small, humorless smile touched his lips. For now, he was quiet for a long moment. The only sound the hum of the bus and the rain against the glass. It's just tiring. Pretending it doesn't hurt, and there it was. The truth, laid bare in the dark of a bus in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't just pretending for the coach or the team. He was pretending for himself. And in that moment, I felt a profound, aching connection to him. Because I knew about pretending. I was an expert. I pretended not to watch him. I pretended not to care. I pretended to be just another teammate, a friend, a ghost in the machine. We were both pretending, just about different things. The conversation ended there. He shifted again, finally settling into a position that seemed to offer some relief. And soon his breathing evened out into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. But I stayed awake for the rest of the ride, his confession echoing in my mind. It's just tiring. Pretending it doesn't hurt. The words became a bridge between us, a shared secret that only I was aware of. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just an observer. I was a confidant, even if he didn't know it. The weight of that knowledge was both a burden and a thrill. The next day, something was different. The air in the locker room felt thinner, the usual boisterous noise slightly muted in my ears. I was hyper-aware of him, of the new layer of understanding that now colored my perception. When he sat down on the bench to deal with his knee, his movements seemed heavier, more weary. He unrolled the bandage with a sigh of resignation that I now understood completely. He tried to wrap it once, his fingers fumbling. He pulled it off with a sharp tug and threw the crumpled ball of fabric onto the floor. He dropped his elbows to his knees, his good knee, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders slumped. It was a posture of utter defeat, and the locker room was emptying. The post-practice rush to the showers was in full swing. Guys were grabbing their towels, shouting jokes, slamming locker doors. Soon, it would just be him and me. My heart started to pound, a frantic, galloping rhythm against my ribs. This is my chance. Do something. Say something. Don't just stand there watching like you always do. The voice in my head was insistent, urgent. One by one, the last of the guys headed for the showers. The heavy door swung shut, its pneumatic hiss cutting off the sounds of spraying water and laughter, leaving the main locker room in a sudden, profound silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of the ventilation system and the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. It was just us. He hadn't moved. His head was still in his hands, his back to me. He must have known I was still there. I hadn't made a sound, but my presence felt enormous, a tangible weight in the quiet room. I could have just left. I could have grabbed my bag and walked out, preserving the comfortable distance I had always maintained. It would have been the easy thing to do, the safe thing. But his words from the bus kept replaying in my mind. It's just tiring. Pretending it doesn't hurt. I took a breath. My own hands were slick with a nervous sweat. I wiped them on my shorts and took a step forward. Then another. The soft soles of my slides were silent on the tiled floor. I stopped a few feet behind him. The air was thick with the scent of him, sweat, deodorant, and something else, something uniquely Julian. It was warm and musky, and it made my head swim. Julian. My voice was a croak. I cleared my throat. You need a hand with that? He lifted his head slowly, but he didn't turn around. I saw the muscles in his back tense. For a long, agonizing second, he didn't say anything. I was sure I had made a terrible mistake, that he would tell me to get lost, to mind my own business. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a rubber band about to snap. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, muffled. Yeah. He finally turned his head, looking at me over his shoulder. His eyes were shadowed, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond the physical. Yeah, man. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. He wasn't angry. He wasn't annoyed. He was accepting. He bent down and picked up the discarded bandage from the floor, shaking it out. He shifted on the bench, moving over to make space. It wasn't a lot of space. It was a clear, deliberate invitation. My legs felt like they were filled with sand as I walked the final few feet and sat down beside him. I sat too close. Or maybe he had made the space too small on purpose. Our thighs were pressed together, from hip to knee. The heat from his skin soaked through my shorts, a searing line of contact that lit up every nerve ending in my body. I was so close I could see the individual beads of sweat clinging to the fine hairs on his arms. I could smell the faint, clean scent of the laundry detergent on his practice jersey, which he'd tossed on the bench beside him. My entire consciousness narrowed to that single point of contact. The world outside of this bench, this small bubble of charged air, ceased to exist. I am here. He is here. We are touching. The thought repeated itself, a mantra of disbelief and terror and exhilaration. He held out the bandage to me. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm and slightly rough. Another jolt, sharp and electric. The bandage felt cool and smooth in my trembling hands. I fumbled with the end, trying to find the start of the roll. Here, he said, his voice a low rumble beside my ear. His proximity made the sound intensely intimate. He took the roll from me, his fingers closing over mine for a second too long. He found the edge and handed it back. Start just below the kneecap, he extended his leg, resting his heel on the opposite bench. The muscles in his thigh contracted, a landscape of sculpted power. My eyes traced the long, clean line of his leg, from the sharp angle of his hip down to his ankle. It was a leg I'd seen kick a ball with breathtaking force, a leg I'd seen carry him across a field with more grace than anyone I knew. Now, it was here, vulnerable and offered up to me. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I leaned forward, my own body angled awkwardly as I tried to start the wrap. The position brought my face closer to his leg. I could feel the radiant heat coming off his skin. I placed the end of the bandage against his shin, my fingers clumsy. No, a little higher, he murmured. And then he did it. He reached out and covered my hand with his own. His palm was broad and heavy, completely engulfing my hand. He gently guided my fingers, repositioning them on his leg. Right there, he said. His voice was soft, instructive. Keep it snug, but not too tight. My brain short-circuited. His hand was on my hand. My hand was on his skin. His skin was warm and solid under my touch. I could feel the faint vibration of his voice travel from his body, through his hand, and into mine. I stopped breathing. I am holding him. He is guiding me. This is happening. He didn't remove his hand. He kept it there, resting over mine, as I began to wrap the bandage around his leg. His touch was a steady, grounding pressure, guiding my movements. My own hands, which had been shaking moments before, became sure and steady under his. We moved together, a slow, synchronized dance. Me, wrapping the bandage. Him, applying a gentle pressure, steering me, showing me the right amount of tension. I pulled the elastic fabric around his calf, then up over the knee. The material was smooth, sliding over his skin. I was hyper-aware of everything. The slight roughness of his skin where his leg hair was growing back after being shaved for athletic tape. The hard, unyielding feel of his patella beneath the thin layer of muscle and skin. The incredible, living warmth of him. He leaned in closer, his head bent so he could watch what I was doing. His hair brushed against my temple. It was soft, and it smelled faintly of his shampoo, something clean and vaguely green, like pine or cedar. The scent filled my senses, intoxicating and overwhelming. I felt a tremor run through my entire body. A little tighter on the crossover, he instructed, his voice a low whisper near my ear. His breath was warm against my cheek. I could feel the words more than hear them, a physical sensation that made the skin there tingle. I adjusted the tension as he'd said, my fingers pressing into the muscle of his thigh as I pulled the bandage taut. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just let me touch him. He had said, "Help me out," a simple request. A phrase used between teammates 100 times a day. But the way he said it, the context, the crushing intimacy of this moment, it was loaded with 1,000 unspoken meanings. He wasn't just asking for help with a bandage. He was letting me in. He was showing me the part of him that hurt, the part he kept hidden, and he was trusting me with it. He was letting me, quiet and invisible Leo, be the one to literally hold him together. The world had shrunk to the space of this wooden bench, to the few inches between our bodies. The air was thick with things I couldn't name. Tension, yes, but also a startling sense of peace. For the first time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was a part of the scene. I was touching him, helping him, connected to him. My yearning, which had always been a distant, abstract ache, was now a concrete, tactile reality. It was the heat of his skin, the weight of his hand, the scent of his hair. I continued to rap, my movements becoming more fluid, more confident. I knew how to do this. I'd watched him, and the trainer, do it 100 times. My observational knowledge was finally being put to use. Up and over the knee, down and around the calf, in a figure-8 pattern that supported the joint from all sides. His hand remained on mine, a silent partnership. He didn't need to guide me anymore, but he didn't let go. His touch was no longer instructive. It was something else. A connection. A statement. I reached the end of the roll. My fingers found the small metal clips, and I carefully fastened them in place, my knuckles brushing against his thigh. The job was done. The bandage was perfect, smooth, even, and secure. It looked professional. It looked like it belonged there. My hand was still on his knee, over the finished wrap. His hand was still on top of mine. I should move. I should pull away. The task was complete. But I was paralyzed. The circuit was complete, and I was terrified to break it. I kept my eyes fixed on the bandage, on our joined hands, afraid of what I might see in his face if I looked up. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was humming with the energy that had been building between us for weeks, for months, for the entire 2 years I had known him. It was the culmination of every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every shared, ragged breath on the field. He finally lifted his hand from mine. The loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp, a sudden cold spot on my skin. I instinctively started to pull my own hand away, my face burning with embarrassment, certain that the moment was over and I had lingered too long. But then, his fingers threaded through mine. It was a slow, deliberate movement. His fingers, strong and calloused, slid between my own, lacing our hands together. His thumb came to rest on my pulse point, where my heart was hammering away like a trapped bird. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. My breath hitched. I finally lifted my head and looked at him. His face was only inches from mine. His blue eyes, which I had only ever seen from a distance, were fixed on me. They weren't unreadable anymore. They were wide open, full of a question and an answer all at once. I saw the weariness there, the vulnerability he'd shown on the bus, but there was something new, too. A softness, a startling clarity. He was looking at me, not at a teammate, not at a useful pair of hands. He was looking at me. The corner of his mouth twitched, that ghost of a smile I knew so well. But this time it wasn't a fleeting thing. It held. "See," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're good at that." His words were simple. The meaning was anything but. He wasn't talking about the bandage. We both knew he wasn't talking about the bandage. He was talking about the stillness, the care, the attention, the things I had been giving him in secret for 2 years. He was telling me that he'd seen it. He had felt it. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed tight around a knot of emotion so intense it felt like it might choke me. All I could do was stare back at him, my eyes burning. I felt a wave of something terrifying and beautiful wash over me. It was the dizzying, terrifying relief of being truly seen. He held my gaze for another long moment, his thumb stroking softly over my wrist. Then, his eyes flickered down to my lips, and then back up to my eyes. The look was a question, a gentle, hesitant request for permission. My heart didn't just beat. It slammed against my ribs, a violent, desperate rhythm. This can't be real. This is a dream. I'm going to wake up in my dorm room, and the ache will be back. But the pressure of his hand in mine was real. The warmth of his thigh pressed against my own was real. The scent of him, the sound of his soft breathing, it was all real. I gave the slightest of nods, a barely perceptible movement. But he saw it. He leaned in, closing the last few inches between us. His movements were slow, tentative, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held in place by the gravity of his presence, by the force of my own suffocating hope. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard kiss. It was impossibly soft. A gentle, questioning pressure. It was just a touch, a bare skimming of skin against skin. But it was enough to shatter my world. It was confirmation. It was everything I had ever wanted and never, ever believed I could have. The taste of him was slightly salty from sweat and warm. It was the most real thing I had ever felt. He pulled back after only a second, his forehead coming to rest against mine. His eyes were closed. His hand was still laced with mine, his grip firm, anchoring me. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, our heartbeats echoing in the small space between us. "Leo," he whispered, my name a prayer against my skin. And that was it. That was all he had to say. Hearing my own name from his lips in that moment felt more intimate than the kiss itself. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. He knew, and it was okay. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, my body humming with a nervous energy that felt like I'd drunk 10 cups of coffee. The memory of the previous evening played in a continuous loop in my head, vivid and overwhelming. The feel of his hand, the scent of his hair, the impossible softness of his lips. It felt like a dream, a fragile, beautiful thing I was afraid to touch for fear of it dissolving. Walking into the locker room before morning practice was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My stomach was a knot of anxiety. What if I had imagined it all? What if he regretted it? What if he walked in and acted like nothing had happened, or worse, treated me with a cold, awkward distance? The thought was a punch to the gut. I had finally been let into his world, and the idea of being cast out again was unbearable. I got changed quickly, keeping my head down, my movements stiff and jerky. I could feel the eyes of my teammates on me, or at least, I imagined I could. Every laugh, every shout, felt like it was directed at me, a commentary on my secret. I was raw, exposed, every nerve ending tingling with a mixture of terror and hope. Then he walked in. The room didn't fall silent. The world didn't stop turning. Julian walked in just like he did every other day. He dropped his bag on the bench, nodded to a few guys, and started to undress. He didn't look at me. My heart sank. A cold dread seeped into my veins. It was nothing. It meant nothing to him. I was a fool. I had misinterpreted a moment of vulnerability, a simple request for help, and blown it up into something it wasn't. The shame was so intense it made my cheeks burn. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of that room and never come back. I fumbled with my cleats, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie the laces. I focused on the task, on the simple mechanics of a knot, trying to block out the noise of the room and the crushing weight of my own disappointment. We went through the entire warm-up and the first set of drills without exchanging a word, without even making eye contact. He was on the other side of the field, a familiar, distant figure. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. The connection I had felt so powerfully last night was gone, replaced by this awful, humming silence. He was all business, his movements sharp, his focus absolute. It was like watching the Julian from before the injury, the impenetrable fortress. I felt sick. I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line and made him so uncomfortable that he had to pretend I didn't exist. Our silent, one-sided relationship had been safe. Now, I had shattered it, and was left with nothing but the jagged pieces of my own stupidity. We took a water break. I went to the coolers, my head down, planning on grabbing a bottle and retreating to a corner to be alone. As I was filling my bottle, a presence settled beside me. I didn't have to look. I knew it was him. The familiar scent, the sheer physical space he occupied. I tensed, bracing myself for, I don't know what. A quiet apology? A gruff, let's forget last night ever happened. Hey, he said, his voice low, meant only for me. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the stream of water filling my bottle. Hey, I managed to reply, my own voice tight. My knee feels better today, he said. The wrap helped. Thanks, I nodded, still not looking at him. So that was it. We were talking about the wrap. We were reducing last night to a simple act of athletic first aid. The finality of it was crushing. No problem, I mumbled. I put the cap on my bottle and turned to leave, to escape this excruciatingly polite conversation. But he put a hand on my arm, stopping me. His touch was light, but it sent a jolt through me all the same. Leo, wait, he said. I finally forced myself to look at him. His face was serious, his blue eyes searching mine. The noise of the team seemed to fade into the background. Can we talk? After practice. For real. Hope, treacherous and resilient, bloomed in my chest. Talk. Yeah, he said, his gaze unwavering. I'll meet you by my truck. He squeezed my arm once, a quick, reassuring pressure, and then he let go and walked away, leaving me standing by the water cooler with my heart hammering against my ribs all over again. It wasn't a rejection. It was a rain check. The rest of practice was a blur. I played on autopilot, my mind consumed with what he wanted to talk about. Every possible scenario ran through my head, from the best to the absolute worst. But his gaze, the sincerity in his eyes when he'd asked to talk, kept the worst of my fears at bay. He had looked earnest. Not angry. Not disgusted. Just serious. As soon as the coach's final whistle blew, the anxiety came roaring back. This was it. I showered and changed in record time, my movements clumsy with haste. I threw my wet towel in the hamper and practically ran out of the locker room, not even waiting to see what Julian was doing. I couldn't bear the thought of another awkward silence. I needed to be there, by his truck, and just get it over with. His truck was an old Ford, slightly battered, parked in the far corner of the student-athlete lot. I leaned against the passenger side door, the cool metal a stark contrast to my heated skin. I waited. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. What if he didn't show? What if this was his way of blowing me off for good? Just as I was about to give in to a full-blown panic, I saw him walking across the parking lot. He moved with that familiar, easy stride, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. He saw me, and his pace didn't falter. He walked right up to me, stopping just a few feet away. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his expression thoughtful. He unlocked the truck with a chirp and tossed his bag into the bed. The sound was loud in the quiet lot. So, he started, leaning his back against the driver's side door, mirroring my posture. About last night, I braced myself. Yeah. He ran a hand through his damp hair. I didn't want you to think. I don't want things to be weird, he said, the words coming out in a slight rush. This morning, on the field, I was just trying to keep my head straight. It was a lot to process. Process what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to know I hadn't invented the whole thing. He looked away for a second, his gaze sweeping over the empty practice fields behind us. He took a deep breath. Processing the fact, he said, turning his intense blue eyes back to me, that I've wanted to do that for a very long time. The air left my lungs in a rush. It was like the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. He'd wanted it. For a long time. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a moment of weakness or confusion. You have. I sounded like an idiot, but I couldn't form a more intelligent response. A small, real smile touched his lips. Leo, do you have any idea how long I've been aware of you watching me? My face flushed with heat. He knew. He had known all along. At first, I thought you were studying my technique or something. He continued, a hint of humor in his voice. But then, I started watching you back. He watched me. The satellite had been observed by its planet. The thought was staggering. I saw how you are, he went on, his voice softer now. Quiet. You see everything. You work harder than anyone else on the team, and you never ask for any credit. And when you think no one's looking, you look at me. He pushed off the truck and took a step toward me, closing the space between us. That look. I've been chasing that look all season. I was speechless. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, of my invisibility, of my unrequited, secret obsession, was wrong. He had seen me. He had been a participant in our silent dialogue the entire time. The knee, he said, gesturing vaguely toward his own leg. It was a pain in the ass, but it was also an excuse. To be weak. To see if you'd, I don't know, step in. And you did. He was standing in front of me now, so close I could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Last night wasn't a mistake. And I don't want it to be a one-time thing. What do you want it to be? I asked, finding my voice at last. I want to figure it out, he said simply. With you. If that's something you want, too. It was everything. It was the answer to a question I had been too afraid to even ask myself for 2 years. Yes, I said, the word full of all the pent-up yearning and hope I had carried for so long. Yes, Julian. I want that. The relief that washed over his face was profound. It was like watching a great weight lift from his shoulders. The stoic protector, the unshakable teammate, let his guard down completely, and all I saw was the man who had admitted he was tired of pretending. He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture was tender, possessive, and utterly grounding. "Good," he murmured. And then he leaned in and kissed me again. This time, it wasn't tentative or questioning. It was sure. It was a kiss of confirmation, of a shared beginning. It was deep and slow, and it tasted of relief and promise. In the middle of an empty parking lot, with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt like I had finally, truly come home. Our beginning was quiet. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic declaration to the world. It was a series of small, private moments that slowly began to stitch our lives together. It was him waiting for me after my last class of the day, leaning against the old oak tree outside the library. It was me leaving a bottle of water and an energy bar at his locker before a game. It was long drives in his truck with no destination, the windows down and the radio playing low, filling the comfortable silences between us. The locker room, once a place of anxiety and secret observation, transformed. It was still our stage, but the play had changed. The ritual of the knee wrap continued, but it was no longer a source of frustration for him or tension for me. It became our thing. After practice, we would be the last to leave. The other guy's departure was our cue. I would sit next to him on the bench, our thighs pressed together, and he would hand me the bandage. There was no more fumbling. My hands knew the rhythm now, the precise amount of tension needed. And he would just sit there, his leg extended, and watch me. Sometimes he would rest his hand on my shoulder. Sometimes he would lean his head back against the cool metal of the lockers and close his eyes, a small, contented smile on his face. It was our quiet intimacy, a ritual hidden in plain sight. No one ever questioned it. If they saw us, they just saw one teammate helping another. They didn't see the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. They didn't see how my fingers would linger on his skin for a fraction of a second too long. They didn't know that the simple, functional act was steeped in a meaning so profound it felt sacred. One afternoon, as I was finishing the wrap, securing the final clips, he didn't move his leg. He just sat there, looking at me with an unreadable expression. "What?" I asked, a little self-conscious under his intense gaze. "Nothing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was just thinking. I don't think my knee even hurts anymore." I stopped, my hand still on his leg. I looked from his knee up to his face. "Really?" He nodded slowly. "It's been fine for about a week. I can barely feel it," a slow smile spread across my face. "So this," I said, tapping the freshly applied bandage, "is all just for show?" He grinned, a full, genuine grin that lit up his entire face. It was a rare sight, and it made my heart do a familiar flip. "I wouldn't say that," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'd say it's become a necessary part of my cool-down routine." He reached out and laced his fingers through mine, right there in the middle of the empty locker room. My favorite part, actually. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a deep and settled joy. The injury, the thing that had been the catalyst for everything, was gone. But what it had started remained. We didn't need the excuse anymore. We had built something real on that foundation of feigned necessity. That night, we were at his off-campus apartment, a small, cluttered place that smelled of him. We were sprawled on his worn-out couch, watching some mindless action movie, my head resting on his chest. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my ear, a sound that had become my favorite form of music. His arm was wrapped around me, his fingers idly tracing patterns on my back. It was simple. It was quiet. It was a level of domestic peace I had never imagined for myself. For years, my life had been defined by a silent, solitary yearning. I had orbited his light, convinced I would forever be stuck in the cold and dark. But now I was here, in the center of his gravity, wrapped in his warmth. He shifted slightly, his chin coming to rest on the top of my head. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured into my hair. "Just thinking," I said. "About what?" I tilted my head back to look at him. His face, illuminated by the flickering light of the television, was soft and unguarded. The stoic mask was gone. This was just Julian. "About how I used to watch you." I admitted, the confession easier now. "All the time. I felt like I was some kind of creep," he smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I told you. I was watching you." Too, he tightened his arm around me. "I was just better at hiding it." "Why?" I asked, the question I had never dared to voice. "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze becoming distant, thoughtful. Because, he began, his voice soft. Everyone else looks at me and sees the soccer player, the captain. They see what I can do. But when you looked at me, it was different. It felt like you were the only one who saw the person who was tired of pretending. Even before I knew I was, his words settled deep inside me. A perfect, soothing balm on years of insecurity. He hadn't just seen my gaze, he had understood it. He had recognized the silent language of my loneliness because he spoke a version of it, too. I settled my head back onto his chest, my ear pressed against his steady heartbeat. The ache that had lived inside me for so long, the constant, low-grade hum of wanting, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, profound sense of belonging. The satellite had found its home. I was no longer an observer of my own life, a spectator in someone else's story. I was here. I was a part of it. And as I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and the beating of his heart, I knew, with a certainty that reached all the way down to my bones, that I would never have to pretend again.